The Tokyo skyline dissolved into a hazy smudge of lights as the 747 kissed the tarmac at JFK. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stretched, my joints protesting the cramped confines of the long flight. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on me, yet a spark of anticipation flickered in my chest. I instinctively patted the pocket of my jacket, feeling the reassuring shape of the small, velvet box nestled within. Vanessa would adore it. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors of customs and immigration, my mind drifted back to the merger. Months of meticulous preparation, fueled by countless cups of coffee and punctuated by sleepless nights, had finally culminated in success. The relentless negotiations, the delicate dance of give and take, had paid off. The partners would be ecstatic. But in that moment, their satisfaction was a distant hum compared to the overwhelming desire to see Vanessa's face. To witness the joy, the surprise, the love that would radiate from her eyes when she saw the anniversary gift. The taxi ride into Manhattan was the usual agonizing crawl through a sea of red brake lights. New York traffic, a perpetual nightmare, seemed especially determined to test the limits of my patience tonight. Leaning forward, I addressed the driver, my voice tight with barely suppressed frustration. "Any chance we can take a shortcut?" He grunted, a dismissive wave of his hand encompassing the gridlocked streets ahead. "In this? You'd have better luck sprouting wings and flying, buddy." I sank back against the worn leather of the seat, resignation settling over me like a heavy shroud. The vintage watch in my pocket, a treasure unearthed in a tiny, dust-filled shop in Ginza, suddenly felt like a lead weight. Its delicate hands, frozen in time, seemed to mock the slow, agonizing passage of minutes. I'd been captivated by its elegant design, its timeless beauty, a perfect reflection of Vanessa's own grace and sophistication. 10 years of marriage, a decade intertwined, and she still possessed the power to steal my breath away. Finally, the familiar silhouette of our penthouse apartment emerged from the urban jungle. I practically threw money at the driver, eager to escape the confines of the cab. A quick nod to the doorman, a familiar face in the lobby, and I was in the elevator, ascending towards home. The brief reprieve of the ride allowed me a moment to compose myself. I smoothed the wrinkles from my tie, ran a hand through my sleep-tousled hair, and practiced the look of surprised delight I planned to unveil for Vanessa. She wasn't expecting me back for another day. The element of surprise was half the fun. The elevator doors whispered open, and I stepped into the hushed stillness of the hallway. I slid the key into the lock, turning it with the practiced ease of someone coming home. The faint click echoed in the quiet. As I eased the door open, the warm, inviting scent of Vanessa's favorite candles wafted towards me, mingled with the soft strains of music drifting from within. "Vanessa?" I called out softly, not wanting to startle her. Silence. A prickle of unease danced across my skin. I stepped further into the apartment, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet, the anticipation slowly morphing into a nameless dread. I moved towards the bedroom, the source of the music, and then I heard her voice. Vanessa's voice. She was laughing, a light, melodic sound that usually filled me with warmth. But this time, something was different. A chilling undercurrent ran beneath the laughter, a discordant note in a familiar melody. "Oh, Alexander," she murmured, her voice low and intimate, laced with a sensual warmth that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. "Last night was amazing. Marcus is so boring in bed compared to you. I can't wait for our trip next week." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the wall, the smooth plaster cold against my palm, as if grounding myself against a sudden, violent storm. My mind reeled, refusing to process the words, the implications. This couldn't be happening. Not Vanessa. Not my Vanessa. Not my wife of 10 years. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by disbelief, the blood pounding in my ears, drowning out the soft music and Vanessa's hushed whispers. Eventually, I heard the click of the phone disconnecting. I retreated, numb and disoriented, back towards my home office, my body moving on autopilot. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound sharp and final, echoing the shattering of my world. I sank into the leather chair, the reality of the situation crashing down on me, wave after wave of agonizing certainty. Vanessa, cheating, with Alexander, her boss. My hands shook as I reached for my laptop. the cool metal a stark contrast to the burning shame that coursed through me. I opened our shared calendar, scrolling through the upcoming weeks, my eyes searching for confirmation of what I already knew. And there it was, stark and unavoidable. Starting next week, marketing retreat 7 days. The pieces clicked into place. A horrifying mosaic of betrayal. The rest of the night passed in a haze of numb disbelief. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. The words caught in my throat, choked by the raw, visceral pain that clawed at my chest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the familiar contours of our bedroom now alien and hostile, while she slept peacefully beside me, oblivious to the devastation she had wrought. And as the first rays of dawn painted the sky, something inside me hardened, a cold, steely resolve taking shape, a promise whispered in the darkness that would change the course of our lives forever. The next morning, I went through the motions of our usual routine, a hollow, robotic performance. I showered, dressed, and joined Vanessa in the kitchen. She looked up from her coffee, her smile as radiant and guileless as ever. "You're back early," she said, her voice light and cheerful, pressing a kiss to my cheek. The casual intimacy of the gesture felt like a brand, searing my skin. "How was Tokyo?" I forced a smile, a grotesque imitation of normalcy, hating the ease with which the lies slipped from my lips. "Productive. We closed the deal." The recordings went on, each one a fresh wound, each whispered endearment, each shared joke a testament to their betrayal. I listened to them all, a morbid fascination compelling me to absorb the full extent of their deceit. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. The truth, as painful as it was laid bare before me. A strange sense of detachment settled over me. The initial shock and rage had given way to a cold, hollow emptiness. I felt like a spectator in my own life, watching the disintegration of my marriage from a distance. I closed my laptop. The images of Vanessa and Alexander burned into my memory. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The sound, once a comforting reminder of home and stability, now seemed to mock the shattered remnants of my life. The next morning, I called my lawyer. His voice, usually jovial and reassuring, was subdued as I explained the situation. He listened patiently, offering murmurs of sympathy and understanding, then outlined my legal options. He assured me that with the evidence I had, securing a favorable settlement wouldn't be a problem. I barely registered his words. The practicalities of divorce, the division of assets, the legal wrangling, it all seemed so trivial, so insignificant compared to the emotional wreckage I was sifting through. When Vanessa returned from her business trip, she was radiating a carefree happiness that made my stomach churn. She greeted me with a kiss, her eyes sparkling with what I now knew was feigned affection. "It was so productive," she gushed, recounting fabricated tales of successful strategy sessions and team-building exercises. I listened, my face an impassive mask, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I let her spin her web of lies, waiting for the right moment. Then, as she paused for breath, I calmly placed the photos and the USB drive on the table between us. The color drained from her face. Her eyes, so bright moments before, widened in shock and then narrowed in fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I know," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I know everything." The ensuing confrontation was brief and brutal. Denials turned to justifications, justifications to accusations. The carefully constructed facade of our marriage crumbled, revealing the hollow shell beneath. There were tears, recriminations, and the bitter taste of betrayal hanging heavy in the air. In the end, she left. She packed a suitcase, her movements hurried and frantic, and walked out of the apartment without a backward glance. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. I stood by the window, watching as the taxi carrying her away disappeared into the city's relentless flow of traffic. The penthouse, once a symbol of our shared success and happiness, now felt vast and empty. I walked through the rooms, touching the objects that held the memories of our life together, each one a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost. I opened the safe and took out the vintage watch. I held it in my palm, the cool metal a stark contrast to the emptiness within me. It was a beautiful piece, a testament to a love that no longer existed. I slipped it back into the box, The soft velvet a final, ironic caress. I wouldn't be giving this gift to Vanessa. The next chapter of my life was beginning. A chapter unwritten and uncertain. But as I looked out at the glittering expanse of the city lights, I knew one thing for sure. I would rebuild. I would heal. And I would never allow myself to be so completely blindsided again. You drive me crazy. I slammed my laptop shut. The bile of betrayal rising in my throat. The evidence was irrefutable. My wife of 10 years. Vanessa, the woman I had built a life with, had been having an affair. For God knows how long. I gathered the photos and recordings, arranging them in a neat pile on the coffee table. Then I sat in my armchair and waited. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the room. By the time I heard Vanessa's key in the lock, she entered, humming softly to herself, her demeanor light and carefree. Her expression shifted to surprise when she saw me sitting there in the dim light. Marcus, you startled me. Why are you sitting in the dark? I reached over and switched on the lamp, the sudden brightness illuminating the tension in the room. How was your retreat, Vanessa? She smiled, setting down her bags. Oh, it was great. Really productive. Lots of team-building exercises and strategy sessions. I think we made some real progress. I nodded, my face impassive. Tell me more about these team-building exercises. They must have been quite intimate. Vanessa's smile faltered. What do you mean? Instead of answering, I gestured towards the pile on the coffee table. Why don't you take a look? She approached cautiously, her eyes widening in horror as she recognized the photos. She picked one up, then another, her face draining of color. Marcus, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can explain. Can you? I asked, my voice as cold as ice. Can you explain why you've been sleeping with your boss behind my back? Can you explain why you've been lying to my face for months? Vanessa's composure crumbled. She fell to her knees beside the coffee table, tears streaming down her face. It's not what it looks like, she pleaded. Really? I said, standing up, my voice dripping with contempt. Because it looks like my wife is a lying, cheating whore. Her head snapped up, shock replacing the tears. I'd never spoken to her like that before. Hell, I'd never spoken to anyone like that before. But the Marcus she knew was gone, replaced by a man consumed by rage and betrayal. How long? I demanded. Vanessa looked away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. 6 months, she whispered. The admission hit me like a physical blow. 6 months, half a year of deception, of being made a fool of. Why? I asked, my voice raw with pain. Vanessa stood up, anger flashing in her eyes. Why? Because you're never here. Marcus, you're always at work, always on your phone, always thinking about the next big case. When was the last time you really looked at me? When was the last time you made me feel wanted? I laughed bitterly. So this is my fault? I've been working my ass off to give us the life you wanted. And this is how you repay me? I never asked for all this. Vanessa shouted, gesturing around our luxurious penthouse. I wanted you, Marcus. I wanted your time, your attention. Alexander gives me that. Along with his dick. I spat, the words laced with venom. Vanessa recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Then her face hardened. You know what? Yes. Alexander gives me everything. You don't. He's passionate, attentive, and he knows how to please a woman. Unlike you. Her words cut deep, but I refused to show it. Well, I hope he's worth it. Because this marriage is over. For a moment, fear flickered in Vanessa's eyes. Then she lifted her chin defiantly. Fine, you want to end this? Go ahead, but just so you know, Alexander has invited me on an exclusive couples retreat to the Maldives next month. I stared at her, incredulous. Are you serious? After everything that's just happened, you're planning another tryst with him? Vanessa smirked, a cruel edge to her voice that I'd never heard before. This is my one chance to impress him with my stretching skills in bed. I'm going, and you can't stop me. Something inside me snapped. I stepped closer, my voice low and dangerous. If you go on this trip, our marriage is over. Do you understand me? There will be no coming back from this. Vanessa laughed, the sound devoid of any warmth. Oh, Dumbo. It was over months ago when I started dating Alexander. She turned on her heel and walked towards our bedroom. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as I heard her begin to pack. The pet name she'd used, once a term of endearment, now felt like a final twist of the knife. As the sounds of Vanessa's packing faded into the background, I sank back into my armchair. The man I'd been when I walked through that door a week ago was gone. In his place was someone harder, colder, and utterly determined to make Vanessa and Alexander pay for their betrayal. I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Derek, it's Marcus. I need a drink. And a lawyer." The bar was dimly lit and mostly empty. Just the way I liked it. Derek was already there when I arrived. 2 glasses of scotch waiting on the table. 1 look at my face. And he pushed a glass towards me without a word. I downed half of it in 1 gulp, welcoming the burn. Derek waited patiently as I gathered my thoughts. "Vanessa's been cheating on me," I finally said, my voice flat. "With her boss, Alexander." Derek's eyes widened. "Shit, Marcus. I'm so sorry. How did you find out?" I gave him the abbreviated version, watching as his expression cycled through shock, anger, and disgust. When I finished, he shook his head, looking as shell-shocked as I felt. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I took another sip of scotch. "I'm going to destroy them," I said, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. "Both of them." Derek leaned back, studying me intently. "Are you sure about this, Marcus? Maybe you should take some time to think things through. Have you considered marriage counseling?" I laughed humorlessly. "Marriage counseling? Did you miss the part where she's planning another fuck fest with Alexander in the Maldives?" "No, Derek. This marriage is over. Now it's just a question of how much damage I can do on my way out." Derek nodded slowly. "All right, if that's what you want. I'm with you. What's our first move?" I spent the next few days in a haze of focused determination. I pored over our prenuptial agreement, identifying loopholes and weaknesses. I gathered every scrap of evidence of Vanessa's infidelity and any financial misconduct, building a case that would leave her with nothing. I moved our shared assets, transferring funds to secure accounts and documenting every transaction meticulously. I wasn't about to give Vanessa any ammunition to use against me. As I worked, a memory surfaced. A corporate event months ago. A young executive named Samantha Chun had cornered me by the bar, her eyes darting nervously as she spoke in hushed tones about her suspicions regarding Alexander's business practices. I dismissed her concerns at the time, but now they took on a whole new significance. It took some digging, but I managed to get Samantha's contact information. I sent her a carefully worded email suggesting a meeting to discuss mutual concerns about organizational integrity. Her response came within the hour, agreeing to meet at a quiet cafe the following afternoon. As I was finalizing my plans, a nagging thought kept resurfacing. I pulled up our shared medical records, a knot forming in my stomach. As I scrolled through the files, there it was, confirmation of my suspicion. Vanessa had stopped taking her birth control 3 months ago. The possibility of pregnancy added a new layer of complexity to my plans. If Vanessa was carrying a child, if it was mine? No. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. I couldn't afford to let sentiment cloud my judgment now. Alexander, it turned out, had been secretly funneling company funds into a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, effectively robbing the company and its shareholders to enrich himself. The merger, Samantha realized, was the final piece of his scheme. Once it was finalized, he planned to disappear, leaving the company and its investors in ruins. This was it, the smoking gun we'd been searching for. I immediately contacted Olivia Ramirez, my divorce attorney, and filled her in on our discovery. She was ecstatic, recognizing the potential this had, not just for my divorce case, but for a potential criminal investigation against Alexander. "This changes everything, Marcus," Olivia said, her voice crackling with excitement. "With this evidence, we can not only strip Vanessa of any claim to your assets, but we can also bring Alexander down. He'll likely face jail time." I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. This was more than just revenge now. This was about justice. This was about protecting innocent people from Alexander's greed and corruption. Olivia and I worked tirelessly over the next few days, preparing our case. We coordinated with Samantha, ensuring that all the evidence was properly documented and presented. We also contacted the authorities, alerting them to Alexander's illegal activities. The day the merger was scheduled to finalize, I walked into the boardroom with Olivia by my side. Vanessa and Alexander were already there, their faces radiating smug confidence. They clearly had no idea what was coming. I addressed the board, laying out the evidence of Alexander's fraud in meticulous detail. The room erupted in chaos. Denials, accusations, and demands for explanations flew back and forth. Vanessa stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Alexander, however, remained remarkably calm. He denied everything, attempting to discredit Samantha and me, painting us as disgruntled employees seeking revenge. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. The authorities, alerted by Olivia, arrived just as the meeting descended into pandemonium. Alexander was arrested on the spot, his face a mixture of shock and fury as he was led away in handcuffs. Vanessa, stripped of her arrogance and composure, was left to face the fallout alone. The board, furious at being deceived, immediately terminated her employment. Olivia, meanwhile, was already preparing the paperwork to file for divorce, ensuring that Vanessa would receive nothing from the dissolution of our marriage. The news of Alexander's arrest and Vanessa's complicity sent shockwaves through the company and the wider business community. The merger was cancelled, and an internal investigation was launched to assess the full extent of the damage Alexander had caused. In the weeks that followed, I worked closely with the authorities, providing them with all the information I had gathered. Alexander was eventually charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, facing a lengthy prison sentence. Vanessa, though not directly implicated in his crimes, was left with a tarnished reputation and a bleak future. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Olivia's expertise ensured that I retained all of my assets, while Vanessa was left with nothing but the shame of her actions. Samantha, hailed as a whistleblower, was offered a promotion and a substantial bonus for her role in uncovering Alexander's scheme. She became a valuable asset to the company, helping to rebuild trust and implement stricter ethical guidelines. As for me, I found a strange sense of peace in the aftermath. The anger and bitterness gradually subsided, replaced by a quiet resolve to move forward with my life. The penthouse, once a symbol of my shattered dreams, was sold. I moved to a smaller, more modest apartment, shedding the trappings of my former life. The pregnancy, confirmed to be Alexander's, became another casualty of their affair. Vanessa, facing the prospect of raising a child alone and dealing with the legal and financial fallout of her actions, chose to terminate the pregnancy. I mourned the loss of the child I might have had, a bittersweet pang of what could have been, but I also knew, deep down, that it was for the best. The child would have been a constant reminder of the betrayal and pain. I focused on rebuilding my life, reconnecting with friends and family I had neglected during my marriage. I rediscovered old hobbies and passions, finding solace in the simple pleasures of life. One evening, as I was walking home from a quiet dinner with Derek, I passed a jewelry store. In the window, a vintage watch, similar to the one I had bought for Vanessa, caught my eye. I paused, a flicker of memory surfacing. Then I smiled, a genuine smile, the first in a long time. Samantha's voice, clear and confident, cut through the hushed anticipation of the boardroom. "Marcus, I've got it," she'd said earlier, her voice tight with excitement. "Irrefutable proof of Alexander's insider trading. He's been using confidential information to make personal investments ahead of major company announcements." I'd replied, "Excellent work, Samantha. Now, here's what we're going to do." And now, the plan was unfolding. I watched from the sidelines, an almost detached observer, as Samantha systematically dismantled Alexander's carefully constructed facade. Alexander, oblivious to the impending doom, exuded an air of smug superiority, his presentation on the upcoming merger flowing smoothly, laced with the confident charm that had captivated so many. He was a master manipulator, a puppet master pulling strings. And for a while, I had been one of his marionettes. But no longer. As the meeting progressed, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The initial nods of agreement and murmurs of approval that had greeted Alexander's presentation gradually faded, replaced by a growing unease. Samantha, poised and professional, waited for her moment. When it arrived, she seized it with the precision of a surgeon. "Before we proceed with Mr. Peterson's proposal," she began, her voice steady and unwavering, "I have some information that the board needs to consider." She laid out the evidence methodically, point by point, weaving a damning narrative of Alexander's deceit and greed. She presented alternative strategies, meticulously researched and ethically sound, that not only exposed the flaws in Alexander's plan but promised significantly higher returns for the company. The board members, initially stunned into silence, listened with rapt attention, their expressions shifting from surprise to concern. And finally, to outrage. Alexander, his face paling as the realization of what was happening dawned on him, tried to interject, to discredit Samantha, to salvage the situation, but his arguments, once so persuasive, now rang hollow, falling flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. He sputtered, his carefully crafted mask of composure cracking, revealing the panicked desperation beneath. The meeting adjourned in a flurry of hushed whispers and shocked murmurs. The board calling for an immediate investigation into Alexander's activities. I slipped away unnoticed, a ghost in the corridors of power. My part in this act complete. The first domino had fallen. Later that evening, a text message from Samantha vibrated on my phone. It worked. Alexander's been suspended pending a full investigation. The board wants me to take over as interim CEO. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Phase 1 was complete. Alexander's professional life was in shambles. And soon, his personal life would follow. Now, it was time to deal with Vanessa. I stood in our empty penthouse. The silence amplifying the cavernous emptiness of the space. The memories that clung to the walls, once comforting reminders of a life I thought was perfect, now mocked me with their bittersweet poignancy. I placed a thick envelope containing the divorce papers and the incriminating photos on the kitchen counter, where Vanessa would be sure to see it. As I turned to leave, my gaze fell upon a framed photo of us on our wedding day, our faces radiating youthful optimism and love. Without hesitation, I knocked it face down on the counter. That life was over. I had a new purpose now. Over the next few days, I kept tabs on Vanessa through my network of informants. As expected, she had fled to Alexander, seeking solace and support in the wreckage of her own making. I pictured their clandestine meeting, perhaps at the upscale restaurant they frequented. Vanessa tearful and desperate, clinging to Alexander as her world imploded, confessing the pregnancy. I imagined Alexander's initial elation quickly souring into apprehension as the implications of the unplanned pregnancy sank in. Their carefully constructed affair, once a source of illicit pleasure and escape, was now a tangled web of complications. Through my connections at the hospital, I learned that Vanessa had scheduled a series of prenatal appointments. It was time to implement the next stage of my plan. I anonymously arranged for information about non-invasive prenatal paternity tests to be sent to Vanessa. The seed of doubt, once planted, would fester, creating a rift between her and Alexander, further eroding the foundation of their fragile relationship. The reports from my sources painted a picture of increasing tension between Vanessa and Alexander. He began pressuring her to consider terminating the pregnancy. His concern focused not on her well-being but on the potential scandal and the impact on his already precarious career. One evening, they were overheard having a heated argument at a restaurant. "You can't seriously be considering keeping it," Alexander hissed, his voice laced with panic. "Think about the scandal. If it turns out to be Marcus's, think about what it could do to our careers." Vanessa, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt, retorted, "Is that all you care about? Your precious career? What about us? What about our future?" Alexander's response was cold and calculated. "There is no us. If this blows up in our faces, be smart, Vanessa. You know what you need to do." I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction as I read the reports. Alexander was showing his true colors. The manipulative charmer revealed as a selfish coward. And Vanessa, blinded by her infatuation, was finally beginning to see the man she had traded her marriage for. A week later, I received confirmation that Vanessa had decided to keep the baby and undergo the paternity test. It was a wrinkle in my plans, but not an insurmountable one. In fact, it could work to my advantage. Sitting in my new apartment, stripped of the opulent trappings of my former life, I reviewed the latest reports from my investigators. The Marcus of a few months ago, the man who had rushed home from Tokyo with a vintage watch and dreams of surprising his wife, seemed like a distant stranger. In his place was someone harder, colder, driven by a single-minded purpose. I saw the pregnancy not as a symbol of loss but as leverage. Whether the child was mine or Alexander's, it would play a crucial role in the final act of my revenge. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. "It's time to file for divorce," I said, my voice cold and determined. and I want to push for full custody of the child, pending paternity confirmation. The day I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional distress, felt like a turning point. The news, as I intended, reverberated through our social circle and Vanessa's workplace. My lawyer, a formidable woman with a reputation for aggressive tactics, presented our case with ruthless efficiency. Mr. Blackwood is seeking full custody of the unborn child, pending paternity confirmation, she stated, her voice echoing through the courtroom. Given the circumstances of Mrs. Blackwood's infidelity and her involvement in ongoing corporate investigations, we believe this is in the best interest of the child. I watched as Vanessa's carefully maintained composure crumbled, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She turned to her own attorney, Olivia Ramirez, a woman known for her sharp wit and aggressive tactics. I had anticipated this move and was prepared. Over the next few weeks, Olivia launched a carefully orchestrated smear campaign against me, leaking stories to the press about alleged controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. I remained stoic, letting my evidence speak for itself. Mr. Blackwood, how do you respond to these allegations of emotional abuse? A reporter shouted as I left the courthouse one day. I paused, turning to face the cameras, my expression carefully neutral. I trust in the legal system to uncover the truth, I said, my voice steady and unwavering. I have nothing to hide. Behind the scenes, I worked tirelessly with my legal team, preparing for the pivotal court session that would determine the course of our divorce and the custody battle. The day arrived, the courtroom packed with reporters and curious onlookers. Vanessa sat across from me, looking pale and drawn. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of something, not quite regret, but a faint echo of the love we once shared. I ruthlessly suppressed it. There was no room for sentimentality in this war. My lawyer presented our case methodically, laying out the irrefutable evidence of Vanessa's infidelity. The private investigator's testimony was particularly damning, describing in detail the trysts he had documented between Vanessa and Alexander. Then came the financial records, each transaction a testament to Vanessa's betrayal. Your Honor, my lawyer stated, her voice ringing with authority, these documents show Mrs. Blackwood's extravagant spending on gifts for Mr. Peterson using joint funds. This is a clear violation of their prenuptial agreement. I watched as Vanessa's face cycled through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally, despair. She leaned over to whisper furiously to Olivia, who looked increasingly frustrated with her client's predicament. Oh, Alexander, Marcus is such a fool. He actually believes I'm on a business trip right now. The recording of Vanessa's voice, laced with smug amusement, filled the courtroom. Several people in the gallery shook their heads in disgust. Even the judge's impassive mask slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of disapproval. As the session concluded, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Public opinion, a powerful force, was shifting decisively in my favor. I could see the fear dawning in Vanessa's eyes as she realized how thoroughly I had outmaneuvered her. Outside the courthouse, I spotted Alexander lurking near the parking lot. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment, and I saw a potent cocktail of anger and fear swirling within his gaze. Good. He was finally beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Later that evening, as I sat in my study, reviewing the day's events, my phone rang. It was Samantha. Marcus, she said, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. You won't believe what I've uncovered about Alexander's business dealings. This goes way beyond what we initially thought. I leaned forward, my interest piqued. Tell me everything. As Samantha laid out the intricate details of Alexander's complex scheme, a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and meticulously concealed transactions, I felt the final pieces of my plan clicking into place. The corporate takedown and the legal battle were converging, creating a perfect storm that would obliterate everything Vanessa and Alexander had built on their foundation of lies and betrayal. Excellent work, Samantha, I said, as she finished her report. I think it's time we brought this information to the board. Are you ready for the endgame? Her response was immediate and resolute. Absolutely. Let's take him down. As I hung up, a small, cold smile played on my lips. The reckoning was at hand, and I would show no mercy. The boardroom buzzed with a palpable tension as I took my seat. Alexander stood at the front, his usual air of invincibility replaced by a noticeable unease. He fidgeted with his notes, his gaze darting nervously around the room. He had no idea that this would be his last stand. Samantha, seated across from me, caught my eye and gave a barely perceptible nod. We were ready. As Alexander droned on about projected growth and market expansions, his voice lacking its usual conviction, I could see the board members shifting restlessly in their seats. The rumors of impropriety, once whispered in hushed tones, had become too pervasive to ignore. Finally, the chairman, a stern-faced man with an air of quiet authority, spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Now, I believe Miss Chun has some additional information to present." Samantha rose, her posture radiating calm authority. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid I have some disturbing information that the board needs to be made aware of immediately." She launched into her presentation, methodically laying out the evidence we had painstakingly gathered: shell companies, offshore accounts, tax evasion, insider trading. It was all there, meticulously documented and irrefutable. I watched Alexander's face as the magnitude of his exposure became clear. His complexion paled, then flushed crimson with anger and dawning panic as he realized he'd been completely outmaneuvered. "This is preposterous," he sputtered, interrupting Samantha. "These are baseless accusations. I demand to know where this so-called evidence came from." The chairman silenced him with a raised hand. "Mr. Peterson, you'll have your chance to respond. For now, let Miss Chun finish." As Samantha continued, detailing the depth and breadth of Alexander's fraudulent activities, the expressions on the faces of the board members shifted from shock to disgust. This was more than just creative accounting or minor indiscretions. This was a systematic defrauding of the company, a betrayal of their trust and a blatant disregard for the shareholders they were entrusted to protect. When Samantha concluded, the room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted questions, demanding immediate action. Alexander stood alone at the front, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. In a desperate, last-ditch effort to deflect blame, he pointed at Vanessa, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, observing the proceedings. "She knew," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Vanessa was aware of everything. She benefited from these transactions too." All eyes turned to Vanessa, who looked like a deer caught in headlights, the blood draining from her face. I saw something break in her eyes. A flicker of realization, of betrayal. In that moment, the last vestiges of whatever feelings she may have harbored for Alexander shattered. What happened next? I couldn't have planned better myself. Vanessa stood, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'd like to make a statement," she said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the room. The room fell silent as Vanessa began to speak. She confirmed her knowledge of some of Alexander's activities, but claimed she had been coerced and manipulated, a pawn in his elaborate game. Then, in a move that surprised even me, she offered to testify against Alexander in exchange for immunity. "I have information," she said, her eyes darting between Alexander and the board members. "Details about fraudulent practices that even Miss Chun hasn't uncovered." The board chairman, his face grim, quickly called for an emergency executive session, as security personnel escorted a furious and disbelieving Alexander from the room. I caught Vanessa's eye for a brief moment, seeing a flicker of the woman I had once loved, lost, desperate, but with a spark of the same fierce determination that had first drawn me to her. I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. As the dust settled, Samantha was appointed interim CEO, tasked with navigating the company through the turbulent waters ahead. I offered my services as legal counsel, which the board gratefully accepted. Later that evening, as Samantha and I debriefed in her new office, she turned to me, a questioning look in her eyes. "Marcus," she said hesitantly, "I can't help but feel there's more to this than just corporate wrongdoing. Your involvement, it seems personal." I met her gaze steadily. "Let's just say I had my reasons for wanting to see justice done. Alexander and Vanessa, they took something from me. I'm simply ensuring they face the consequences of their actions." Samantha nodded slowly, seeming to accept my explanation. "Well, whatever your reasons," she said, "I'm glad we worked together. We've saved this company from disaster." Phase 2 of my plan was complete. Alexander's professional life lay in ruins, and Vanessa was scrambling to salvage what she could from the wreckage. But it wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of the divorce proceedings and the unborn child. As I drove home that night, my phone buzzed with a message that would add a final, unexpected twist to my carefully orchestrated revenge. It was from Vanessa. "Paternity test results are in. The baby is yours. We need to talk." I allowed myself a cold smile. Let her think this changed anything. She was about to learn that the man she had betrayed was long gone, replaced by someone who wouldn't be swayed by sentiment or manipulation. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I poured myself a glass of scotch and stood by the window of my new apartment, looking out over the glittering expanse of the city lights. The paternity confirmation was a significant development, but it didn't alter my ultimate goal. If anything, it strengthened my resolve to ensure that my child would be raised far away from Vanessa's toxic influence. After careful consideration, I typed out a brief reply. "I'll have my lawyer contact you to discuss arrangements. Do not attempt to contact me directly again." I could almost feel Vanessa's desperation radiating through the phone as a flurry of messages followed, begging for a chance to talk, to explain, to make things right. I ignored them all, my mind already racing with the implications of this new information. The next morning, I met with my lawyer to adjust our strategy. "We'll use this to strengthen our case for full custody," I told her. Vanessa's involvement in Alexander's schemes, combined with her erratic behavior during the affair, makes her an unfit mother. My lawyer nodded, a predatory gleam in her eye. "We'll paint a picture of a woman so consumed by ambition and lust that she was willing to risk everything, including the well-being of her unborn child. The judge will have no choice but to rule in your favor." My lawyer's words resonated with a cold certainty that mirrored my own. As we finalized our legal strategy, I couldn't help but reflect on the transformation I had undergone. The man I was just months ago, the man who would have been overjoyed at the news of impending fatherhood, who might have even considered reconciliation, was gone. He had been replaced by someone harder, colder, driven by a thirst for justice that eclipsed all other emotions. The final pieces of my plan were falling into place. Alexander was facing criminal charges, his reputation and career in tatters. Vanessa was isolated, her professional and personal life in ruins. And I was poised to emerge from this ordeal not just victorious, but with a clean slate, a chance to shape a new life on my own terms. As I left my lawyer's office, my phone rang. It was Samantha. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "The board has officially named me CEO. They want you to stay on as chief legal counsel. We're going to rebuild this company, make it stronger and more ethical than ever." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Not only had I achieved my revenge, but I had also positioned myself for a new chapter of professional success. "Congratulations, Samantha," I replied. "I look forward to working with you to reshape the company's future." That evening, as I sat in my study, reviewing the final divorce papers, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with pain and betrayal, but I had emerged stronger, more focused, utterly unencumbered by the weaknesses of my former self. Vanessa and Alexander had underestimated me. They had thought they could discard me without consequences. They were about to learn the true cost of their betrayal. And as for me, I was ready to embrace my new role as a single father and corporate power player, leaving the ashes of my old life behind without a single regret. The stage was set for the final act. I arrived at our old favorite cafe, a place once filled with laughter and shared dreams, but now as foreign and unfamiliar as Vanessa herself. The familiar scent of coffee and pastries did nothing to soften my resolve. I spotted Vanessa instantly, her fingers nervously tapping the table, her eyes darting around the room, a mixture of hope and fear etched on her face. As I approached, she stood abruptly. "Marcus, thank you for coming," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I cut her off with a raised hand, taking my seat across from her. "You said you had something to tell me. So tell me." Vanessa took a deep breath, pulling a sealed envelope from her purse. "The paternity test results, the baby, it's yours, Marcus." I kept my face impassive, even as my mind raced with the implications. Vanessa, mistaking my silence for shock, pressed on. "I know I've made terrible mistakes, but this changes everything, doesn't it? We can work things out. For the sake of our child, we could be a family." I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding, my voice carefully neutral. And what makes you think I'd want that? Vanessa? Her face fell. But it's your child. Our child. Surely you want to be part of its life. Oh, I intend to be, I said, my voice hardening. But you seem to be under the mistaken impression that this news changes anything between us. Vanessa's eyes widened. How can you say that? This is our baby we're talking about. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. Let me be clear, Vanessa, I'm glad to know about my child. But your betrayal goes far beyond the affair. You violated every principle of trust, respect, and shared values that our marriage was built on. A baby doesn't change that. Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes. Please, Marcus, I know I hurt you. But I've changed. I've realized what's truly important. Give me another chance. For our child Sake. I almost laughed at the desperation in her voice. Another chance to do what? Exactly? To lie to me again? To make a fool of me while you sneak around with your boss? Vanessa's demeanor shifted abruptly, her tears giving way to anger. Fine, if that's how you want to play it. Then I'll fight you every step of the way. I'll go for full custody. You'll never see this child if I have anything to say about it. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Reaching into my briefcase, I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table between us. You see, Vanessa, I've been preparing for this moment. In this dossier, you'll find detailed accounts of your erratic behavior over the past months. Your involvement in Alexander's fraudulent schemes. Statements from your colleagues about your unstable work performance. Oh. And let's not forget the audio recordings of you laughing about your infidelity. Vanessa's face paled as she flipped through the documents. How did you? This is an invasion of privacy. No, Vanessa, I said calmly. This is protecting my interests and the interests of my child. Given your current legal troubles and potential criminal charges, I'm quite confident the court will rule in my favor regarding custody. Vanessa slumped back in her chair, the fight draining out of her. How did you become so cold? Marcus? This isn't you. I stood, gathering my things. You're right, this isn't the man you married. That man died the day you laughed about the end of our marriage. You taught me a valuable lesson. Vanessa, never again will I be weak enough to let someone like you into my life. As I turned to leave, Vanessa called out, her voice breaking. Marcus, please, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I paused, looking back at her one last time. But it did happen, Vanessa, and now we all have to live with the consequences. Walking out of the cafe, I felt no remorse, no second thoughts. The woman I had once loved was now nothing more than an obstacle to overcome in my quest for justice and a new life. And I would let nothing, not even the impending birth of my child, stand in my way. The news of Alexander's suspension and the ongoing investigation spread through the business world like wildfire. I sat in my new office at the company, now serving as chief legal counsel, watching the stock ticker scroll nervously across my computer screen. The company's value had taken a significant hit, but I knew it was only temporary. Samantha burst into my office, her face flushed with a mixture of stress and excitement. Marcus, we need to get ahead of this. The press is having a field day, and investors are panicking. I nodded, already pulling up the statement we had carefully prepared. Let's call a press conference. We'll emphasize the company's commitment to transparency and ethical business practices. Highlight your appointment as CEO, and the board's swift action in removing Alexander. As we worked to stabilize the situation, more details of Alexander's crimes came to light. The scope of his misdeeds was staggering, a sophisticated price-fixing scheme with competitors, insider trading based on stolen confidential information, and corporate espionage that reached into the highest levels of rival companies. I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction as I watched Alexander's carefully constructed world crumble around him. His reputation was in tatters. His career destroyed. It was everything I had hoped for and more. One afternoon, as Samantha and I were reviewing the latest findings, she turned to me with a quizzical look. Marcus, she said hesitantly, I can't help but wonder, how did you know where to look? It's almost as if you had inside information. I met her gaze steadily. Let's just say I had my suspicions about Alexander for a while. When the opportunity arose to investigate, I took it. Samantha nodded slowly, seeming to accept my explanation. Well, whatever your methods, she said, I'm grateful you've saved this company from disaster. As the days passed, I continued to monitor Vanessa's situation through my network of informants. She was becoming increasingly isolated, abandoned by former friends and colleagues who were eager to distance themselves from the scandal. She was facing mounting legal fees and the prospect of a difficult custody battle. The walls were closing in. The final act was about to begin. The judge had no choice but to rule in my favor. The evidence was overwhelming. The narrative of Vanessa's betrayal and complicity airtight. As we finalized our approach, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. The man I was just months ago. The man who would have been overjoyed at the news of impending fatherhood. Who might have even considered reconciliation. Was a ghost. He was gone, replaced by someone forged in the fires of betrayal. Hardened by the pursuit of justice. The final pieces of my plan were falling into place. Alexander faced a long list of criminal charges. His reputation and career irrevocably tarnished. Vanessa, isolated and increasingly desperate, was trapped in a downward spiral of her own making. And I, poised to emerge from the wreckage, would not only be victorious but would have a clean slate. A chance to build a new life. Defined by my own terms. Leaving my lawyer's office, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Samantha. "Marcus," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. "The board has officially named me CEO. And they want you to stay on as chief legal counsel. We're going to rebuild this company. Make it stronger and more ethical than ever." A surge of satisfaction coursed through me. I had not only achieved my personal revenge but had also secured a position of power and influence. A platform to reshape the company's future. "Congratulations, Samantha," I replied, my voice steady. "I look forward to working with you." That evening, reviewing the final divorce papers in the quiet solitude of my study, I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. The journey had been long and arduous. A brutal odyssey of pain and betrayal. But I had emerged stronger, more focused, and completely free from the shackles of my former life. Vanessa and Alexander had underestimated me, believing they could discard me like a broken toy. They were about to learn the true cost of their actions. I was ready to embrace my new role as a single father and a corporate power player. Leaving the ashes of my old life behind without a single regret. The stage was set for the final act. I arrived at the cafe. A place once filled with shared laughter and whispered confidences. Now heavy with the ghosts of our past. The familiar aroma of coffee and pastries did nothing to soften the steel in my heart. Vanessa was already there, her fingers nervously drumming on the table. Her eyes darting around the room. A mixture of hope and fear warring within their depths. As I approached, she stood abruptly, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. "Marcus, thank you for coming," she began, her voice laced with a fragile hope. I cut her off with a raised hand, taking my seat across from her. "You said you had something to tell me. So tell me." Vanessa took a deep breath, pulling a sealed envelope from her purse. "The paternity test results, the baby, it's yours." "Marcus." I maintained a carefully neutral expression, even as my mind raced with the implications. Vanessa, mistaking my silence for shock, pressed on. "I know I've made terrible mistakes. But this changes everything, doesn't it? We can work things out. For the sake of our child. We could be a family again." I let her words hang in the air for a beat, then responded, my voice devoid of any warmth. "And what makes you think I'd want that? Vanessa?" Her face crumpled. "But, it's your child. Our child. Surely you want to be a part of his life." "Oh, I intend to be," I said, my voice hardening. "But you seem to be laboring under the mistaken impression that this news changes anything between us." Vanessa's eyes widened in disbelief. "How can you say that? This is our baby we're talking about." I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. "Let me be clear, Vanessa. I'm glad to know about my child. But your betrayal goes far beyond the affair. You violated every principle of trust, respect, and shared values that our marriage was built on. A baby doesn't change that." Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes. "Please, Marcus, I know I hurt you. But I've changed. I've realized what's truly important. Give me another chance, for our child's sake." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of her plea. Another chance to do what? Exactly? To lie to me again? To make a fool of me while you continue your affair? Vanessa's demeanor hardened, her tears replaced by a flash of anger. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it. Then I'll fight you every step of the way. I'll go for full custody. You'll never see this child if I have anything to say about it." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." Reaching into my briefcase, I pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. In this dossier, Vanessa, you'll find detailed accounts of your behavior, your involvement in Alexander's schemes, statements from your colleagues, and, of course, the recordings of your indiscretions. Vanessa's face paled as she flipped through the documents. How did you? This is an invasion of privacy. No, Vanessa, I corrected, my voice icy. This is protecting my child. Given your predicament, I'm confident the court will agree. Vanessa slumped back, defeated. How did you become so cold? Marcus, this isn't you. I stood up, gathering my things. You're right, this isn't the man you married. That man is gone. You killed him. I paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. You taught me a valuable lesson. Vanessa, never be weak, never trust, never forgive. I didn't wait for a reply. As I walked away, I felt a sense of finality. A chapter closed. The woman I had once loved was now a stranger. A ghost of my past. My future, and the future of my child, lay ahead, free from the shadows of betrayal and deceit. The final act was over. The curtain had fallen. The hum of the city, a constant, low thrumming beneath the quiet of my apartment, no longer held the same dissonant edge of loneliness it once had. One evening, as Samantha and I worked late, poring over legal documents and strategizing for an upcoming acquisition, she paused, turning to me with a thoughtful expression. You know, Marcus, she said softly, I never properly thanked you for everything you've done. Without you, none of this would have been possible. I allowed myself a small, rare smile. We make a good team. Samantha, I'm glad I could help steer the company in the right direction. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, Have you heard anything about Vanessa or Alexander recently? I nodded, my expression hardening slightly. Alexander was found guilty on all charges. 15 years in federal prison, plus fines that have essentially bankrupted him. As for Vanessa, last I heard, she's still working that copywriting job. She's been attending mandated therapy sessions as part of her visitation agreement. Samantha shook her head slowly. It's hard to believe how far they've fallen. Then, after a pause, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, Do you ever regret how things turned out? I met her gaze directly, my eyes unwavering. No, they made their choices. I simply ensured they faced the consequences. As Vanessa's due date approached, I received an unexpected call. Her voice, hesitant and almost meek, surprised me. Marcus, she began, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be there for the birth? It's your child too. After all, I considered refusing outright, but then realized that my presence would be strategically advantageous, ensuring a smooth and immediate custody transfer. Fine, I agreed, my voice curt, but this changes nothing between us. Vanessa, understood, she replied, a quiet resignation in her tone. Leaving the hospital with my daughter cradled in my arms, a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket, I felt a profound sense of renewal, of purpose. The journey that had begun with such devastating betrayal and pain had led me to this unexpected moment of new beginnings. I had lost a wife, but gained a daughter. I had been betrayed, but had emerged stronger, more successful than ever. As I settled into my new role as a single father, balancing the demands of parenthood with my responsibilities as chief legal counsel, I often reflected on the tumultuous path that had brought me to this point. The man I had been a year ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, yet also more capable and determined. Vanessa and Alexander had underestimated me, believing they could discard me without consequences. They had learned, in the most brutal way possible, that Marcus Blackwood was not a man to be trifled with. And as for me, I had everything I wanted: success, respect, and the opportunity to shape a new life entirely on my own terms. Looking down at my sleeping daughter, I made a silent vow. She would grow up knowing her father's strength, not his weaknesses. She would learn the value of loyalty and integrity, and the importance of standing up for herself. I would ensure she never experienced the kind of devastating betrayal that had shaped my own life. Weeks turned into months, and I settled into a comfortable routine, balancing my parental duties with my professional responsibilities. Samantha and I continued to work closely, steering the company towards even greater success. Our professional relationship, forged in the crucible of shared adversity, began to evolve, hinting at something deeper, more personal. We approached it cautiously, both of us wary of rushing into anything, our past experiences serving as a constant reminder of the fragility of trust. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, I received an unexpected visitor. Derek stood in my doorway, his face etched with a mixture of hesitation and guilt. "Marcus," he began, his voice strained. "Can we talk?" I gestured for him to enter, my curiosity piqued by his uncharacteristic demeanor. He sank heavily into the chair across from me, his face a mask of unease. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." As he spoke, haltingly confessing his long-held feelings for Vanessa and his role in tipping me off about the affair. A cold anger began to simmer within me. This man, whom I had considered my closest friend, had harbored these secrets, playing God with my life. I thought I was doing the right thing. Derek finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "But seeing what it's done to you, how it's changed you, I can't live with the guilt anymore." I sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the weight of this new betrayal. Then, slowly, I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling cityscape below. "You know, Derek," I said, my voice cold and controlled. "A year ago, this revelation might have destroyed me. But now I see it for what it is. Another lesson in the importance of self-reliance." I turned back to face him. My expression hardened. "You've eased your conscience. Good for you. But our friendship, that ended the moment you decided to play God with my life. Get out of my office. Get out of my life." Derek left without another word, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt no regret, no pang of loss, just a renewed conviction in the path I had chosen. A year later, I stood in my living room, surrounded by a small gathering of colleagues and acquaintances, celebrating my daughter's first birthday. Ethan, now a toddler, wobbled around the room, his infectious laughter filling the air. Samantha approached, a warm smile gracing her features. "She's beautiful. Marcus, you've done an amazing job with her." I nodded, a genuine smile touching my lips. "She's the best thing in my life. Everything I do for her." As I looked around the room, I marveled at how much had changed. My professional life was thriving, the company's reputation fully restored, our ethical reforms becoming a model for the entire industry. Samantha and I cautiously and deliberately were exploring a relationship, both of us acutely aware of the risks, yet drawn to each other's strength and resilience. I had heard that Vanessa, after completing her mandated therapy, was slowly rebuilding her life. She attended her supervised visits with Ethan regularly, and I could see a genuine effort on her part to become a better person. While I would never fully trust her again, I recognized the importance of my daughter having a relationship with her mother. As for Alexander, his cautionary tale had become a staple in business schools across the country. His spectacular fall from grace served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked greed and betrayal. Derek had taken a sabbatical after our confrontation, and I had heard rumors of his return to the city. While I had no interest in rekindling our friendship, the anger I had once felt had faded into indifference. As the party wound down and I put Ethan to bed, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The path that had led me here had been fraught with pain and betrayal. But it had also forged me into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. I looked at my sleeping daughter, feeling a surge of love and protectiveness. She was the unexpected gift born from darkness, the reason I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. As I closed the nursery door, a sense of profound peace settled over me. The future stretched before us, uncertain yet full of promise. And whatever challenges it held, I knew I was ready to face them, with the same unwavering determination that had carried me through the storm. The man I had been 2 years ago was gone, but in his place stood someone stronger, someone who would never again be a victim. And as I looked out at the city lights, twinkling like a million scattered diamonds against the velvet sky, I felt no regret for the choices I had made. Every step, every decision, had led me to this moment, and I wouldn't change a single thing.